I don't look constipated, right?
Yeah, looking sweet.
Okay, I'm not even going to ask anymore. Because it's making me less. Because if it is, let me know. Let me go and tap Judeki. He has makeup kits. I can make something happen. So what am I supposed to be looking at? That or this?
Alright, boss. So one last thing. Some of your fans, some people that have had a...
My name is Solace Chukwu. I'm senior editor Paul Sports. To be honest, this was a bit of a thought experiment on my part. I just thought something that would celebrate them in a way would be a really nice way to go. It was an idea that challenged me. So I wanted to see if I could really take that on. I hadn't seen anybody else do it, even people who are way older than me. I just thought it would be something that would spark conversation, also shine a light on some of Nigeria's more story players from the past that some of the current generation are not quite familiar with. There's a tendency to look at Nigerian football as though it started with the 1994 team, which is not true. There was a lot of football played way before that, and I thought this would be a good way to, sort of shine the light on that. The list is called the 10 greatest Nigerian footballers of all time. But when it comes to greatness, I factored in a lot of different things. Ability obviously is very important because, you can't be one of the greatest players if you couldn't actually play. So I factored in success at club level because that's really the day-to-day of a footballer's life. I factored in international career as well. I also looked at the players' leadership qualities because I think that's important. And finally, their social impact. Now, social impact is basically how, if the player transcended football, how much they did for the image of Nigerian football, how much they did in the wider society. I think this is also important. It's actually been really positive. I think a lot of people were pleased to see someone talking about especially some of the players who played like in the 80s or in the 70s. People were quite enthused to see them on the list, especially some of the older guys. As with any kind of ranking, there's always going to be disagreements, people feeling someone is too low or this other person is too high, whatever. That comes into it, and there's nothing you can do about that. Yeah, easily. I think purely in terms of ability, and I reflected that in the ranking, purely in terms of ability, JJ Okocha is close to hands down the best player to come out of Nigeria. Once I started to reckon with the entirety of his career, I looked into the other criteria, it was a little bit sad, to be honest, because club career, JJ Okocha really did not hit the heights. We know he spent the final years of his, active career playing Bolton, Hull City. Those were really clubs that were not quite at the level you would expect for a player of his ability. Earlier in his career, played for Eintracht Frankfurt, not particularly successful. As a matter of fact, he got relegated while he was there. Went to Turkey, played for Fenerbahce, who were league champions when he got there. They dropped out the title reckoning. He went to PSG, record transfer. That didn't work out either. The transfer was frankly a failure. So you do look at a player like Gigi and you wonder what he could have done with all of that ability, what level he could have played at. If I had to pick three words, I would say composure, I would say leadership, I would say respect. He was someone who earned a lot of respect for his quietness, for his unflappability. Nothing ever got to him by all accounts. He was this very solid, dependable character you just couldn't get at Christian Chukwu. On the pitch, he would be giving out instructions to his teammates on what to do specifically to handle different opponents, how to organize themselves in certain phases of play. So in that sense, he was very much a leader. Christian Chukwu was definitely a top of the line as a defender, unflinching man marker, great at covering, great at engaging. He could bring the ball out as well. He scored this really famous goal against Egypt in the qualifier for the World Cup. Sunday Olise, obviously mostly known for his long passing, forged a really good understanding with Rashidi Yekini, who was excellent at making runs off the last line of defense. So Olise was a great long passer of the ball. I think in terms of playing at the base of midfield, he was probably the most rounded two-way defensive midfielder in terms of the fact that he was really good at winning the ball as well. He was a really tough tackler and could also pass over long distances. So that was Sunday Olise. Mikel is a bit similar, but without the same level of like defensive solidity, I would say. I think Mikel positionally was really good. I think he was a better short passer than Sunday Olise. Not quite as good in terms of releasing runs over the top of the defense as Olise was. So Mikel was more of a controlling sort of midfielder in terms of what he did with the ball. He was someone who could put his foot on the ball, really control the game, dictate the tempo of it. Mudala was really, really complete. I mean, this is someone who played defensive midfield, central midfield. He played on the wing. He played as an attacking midfielder. He played even as a striker in the final of the Africa Cup of Nations in 1980. So he could really do everything. He was energetic. He was dynamic. He was a powerful runner, could link up all over the pitch. So of the three, I would say he was the most complete in terms of what he could actually do in midfield. Olise, great short passer, excellent defender. Mikel, great controller. So that's how I would sort of split it between the three of them. Something I mentioned while I was writing the piece, and something that really struck me, was before the diagnosis, of his weak heart and the surgery that came after that, he had already achieved so much as a footballer, as a young footballer. So for him to do all of that, going for the surgery, come out and still have the career that he did was really fantastic. I think Kanu deserves a lot of adulation, and he does get it. So to be fair, he does get that. On the pitch, like we say, Kanu did so much. I think being the only Nigerian player ever to win the African Footballer of the Year twice, I think that's really significant because, we evaluate Kanu now and we say this is someone who didn't really have a great national team career. In terms of the fact that, okay, he wasn't around when the 94 team won the AFCON. Obviously, Nigeria didn't play in 96 and 98, and then in 2000 got to the final and lost. And also, on a personal level, he didn't actually score a goal at the Africa Cup of Nations. So we sort of look at his international career and say it was kind of underwhelming. But when you take that into account, the fact that he won 2 African Player of the Year awards, and these were awards that were not in dispute. There was no controversy around them. It was generally accepted and known that he deserved them on both occasions. I think that's tremendous. I would say they should probably read the piece that I wrote about it. Like I say, greatness takes in a lot of things. And I think in terms of social impact outside of football, there has been no more influential footballer than Keshi in Nigerian football history. I genuinely think Nigerian football would be a totally different thing if Keshi had not come along. Keshi was pretty much an ambassador for African football in Belgium. It wasn't just him going there to play football. He opened doors for these other players. Players were coming to Belgium from Africa on his recommendation alone, just on the strength of Stephen Keshi saying, this guy is a really good footballer. That is crazy level of influence. As a captain, in terms of leadership, his style wasn't to everyone's taste, but the truth is, when Keshi was captain, everybody played for Keshi. Everybody wanted to die for Keshi. He was that influential. He was someone who coaches relied on, players could come to with problems. He was just the guy. He was the man. He had an outstanding national team career. He won the Africa Cup of Nations, obviously, in 1994. He finished second. He ran the whole gauntlet. He finished second, finished third, got to the World Cup, actually played at the World Cup. And this was even at the time when he was sort of in the twilight of his career. He still played at the World Cup. Part of the reason a lot of people disagree with Keshi at number one is people don't reckon with him really as a player. And that's the same thing I mentioned earlier when we were talking about someone like Christian Chukwu, is when someone is so obviously a leader, people lose sight of the person as a footballer. Keshi was a fantastic passer of the ball. Like, some of the things he could do in terms of passing, with the outside of his foot. We see a player like Virgil van Dijk do that these days, and we're like, oh wow, this is great. But Keshi was doing that like with effortless ease. Keshi was someone who could play centre back and who could play defensive midfield. And it's not like now when it's like, okay, all the rules sort of meld together, everybody's a universalist, you can play multiple rules. Then defenders defended, midfielders were midfielders. But Keshi could do both seamlessly and excel at both. Incidentally, if there's anything that marks him down even a little bit, it's probably his club career. Even then, he was fantastic at club level, even though he didn't play for the highest level of club in Europe, but he played for Anderlecht. He got to the final of European competition, the first Nigerian player ever to play in the final of a European Cup competition. I genuinely don't think so. Here's the reason why. Like I said, it's more than just really the football in terms of what he could do on the pitch. It's everything he represented for the growth of Nigerian football. I just think that the whole point of being a pioneer at that level, at that time, is so that you can take Nigerian football to the level where it doesn't need that anymore. So if you build a bridge, to connect Nigeria to the rest of the world in terms of football, you don't need someone else to come build another bridge because the bridge is already there. So I don't think Nigerian football really has a call for someone as larger than life as Keshi was, and that's exactly why I don't think Nigerian football produced another person like that. But even if you go beyond that, just for his footballing ability and what he represented to Nigerian football, Keshi was too unique. He was too one of a kind. So what Keshi represented to Nigerian football back then is really not required in modern football anymore. For that reason and that reason alone, we're never going to have another Stephen Keshi. He was really that special. I think Vincent Enyeama really is someone who people tend to underrate a little bit. It's easy to look past someone who is so consistent for so long. Obviously, Peter Rufai also had a long national team career, distinguished national team career. But I think Enyeama trumps him in pretty much every criteria. Vincent Enyeama had a sterling club career. The fact that he played only at Lille in Europe kind of leads people to forget, but this is someone who won back-to-back Champions League titles with the Enyimba. And I think that's really important because Nigeria had never won that competition before, like literally ever. The Champions League was usually reported as the elusive Champions League. That's what the media called the Champions League in Nigeria until Enyimba did it. So to win it not once but twice, Enyimba literally put Nigerian club football on the map again in Africa. Enyeama was very different to what Nigerian perception of a goalkeeper was, because Enyeama wasn't particularly big or imposing. Peter Rufai was a big guy, had a lot of presence, and Peter Rufai was a showman. He was someone who did everything with a flourish. He would come for crosses. There would be, very ostentatious catch, landing. He was a flamboyant person. He came from royalty, so he was a flamboyant personality. So he vibed with what Nigerians expected from a goalkeeper. And Yamba was very different, very understated, a little smaller. He faced opposition from the media. He dispelled that. He faced opposition from the coach of the national team when Betty Vogt came on board in 2007. He said Enyeama was too small. Wanted a bigger goalkeeper. He went with us Nigide. Enyeama ruled that out, reclaimed the #1 spot. He made a couple of errors along the way, fine, yeah, but he always bounced back. He stayed at less consistent level for so long. He holds the record for consecutive clean sheets for Nigeria as a goalkeeper. Rashidi Yekini, to me, was not an outstanding finisher. I think even within the Nigerian context, there were a couple of strikers who were actually better finishers. What Yekini had going for him was Yekini was fantastic in terms of his movement. Yekini could make runs all day. He was someone who never got discouraged from making runs. He was a powerful runner. He knew how to peel off the back of defenders, get in between them. He knew how to attack the front post, back post. He was someone who was very clued in terms of his movement within the box and also off the last line of the defense. So he always got chances. In terms of finishing, I mean, there have been a lot of great finishers in world football, so I wouldn't really know where to put him. But I think if you look at it purely from a finishing perspective, you kind of miss the point of Yekini. In terms of his movements, Yekini was superb, supreme, elite. And that was what made him such an efficient and consistent goal scorer for Nigeria. If you look at it purely from a ratio perspective, in terms of what he's already done, he definitely has a chance. I wouldn't rule that out. I think when you look at the two of them, you sort of understand where the comparison is coming from and where the expectation is coming from, because they have very similar styles. Both very powerful runners, both very athletic. They will get on defenders' nerves all game. They love running in behind. So their styles are very similar. And like I said, Nigerians, we still have this hang up with the 94 team. So every time we look at a really promising young player, we try to equate, okay, who does this person remind me of from 1994? So I think there's a bit of that with Osimhen, but genuinely his style and Yekini's are very similar. I think in terms of what he's done already to this point, if he carries on like this, if injuries, let him be, and if he, continues to consistently perform at the top level and for Nigeria, I think Yekini's record is quite beatable. It might take him a little longer because Yekini scored his 37 goals in 58 matches for Nigeria. That's a crazy ratio. The ratio itself might not be that repeatable, but in terms of the actual tally, I think 37 is very achievable for Osimhen. It's an interesting question because someone actually asked for an honorable mentions list, and to be honest, the amount of work he did to do a top 10 was, I couldn't. But I think there are a couple of people who could have gotten in, but for me, the closest to getting was probably Finidi George. Finidi George had a similarly great career, won the Champions League with Ajax, played to a really high level with Real Betis and the Premier League as well with Ipswich. Great national team career as well, won the AFCON, did everything. So he's probably the one who I could see getting in as a number 11. A little tweak here and there for certain players could actually have bumped them a little higher. But in Joseph Yobo's case, I think it's his club career, to be honest. He did well for himself playing for Everton. He played at Marseille, did pretty well, had distinguished careers there. But in terms of actually winning honours, there weren't that many to reckon with for Joseph Yobo. And then you also have to think about the relative lack of social impact, because it's something that I'm not necessarily holding it against him as a person, but if I'm taking the entire criteria of the list into consideration, he had relatively low social impact in terms of Nigerian football. Amokachi is, like you say, he's a very well-loved player. He single-handedly made the number 14 shirt mean something in Nigerian football, which is interesting, because number 14 is not really a traditional football number, right? But Amokachi made it mean something. So automatically nowadays, once you say 14, people think, oh, okay, he's a backup striker, he's second striker, whatever. We've seen Iheanacho wear the number, so yeah, it obviously means something. I don't think Amokachi was the most naturally talented footballer. He was a very intelligent player, very powerful, very aggressive footballer, clearly very passionate, and he parlayed that into a really impressive career at a respectable level. He won a lot with Nigeria, but his club career wasn't particularly distinguished, to be honest. I think he's more fan favorite. He had a very infectious personality, loved music, loved dancing. He was someone Nigerians could really relate to as a personality. So I think that's what one could say about Amokachi, but I wouldn't put him in a discussion with any of these guys, even purely from an ability perspective, before we get to other things. Obviously a legend of Nigerian football still. JJ, Segun Odegbami, and this is going to be weird because this is someone who didn't get in the list at all. He was called Olumo Rock in his playing days. Segun Olumodeji played at centre back. He's someone who purely on ability would have gotten in, but when you consider other factors, I couldn't put him on the list. Based on, by all accounts, he was probably Nigeria's best defender, purely on ability, but he couldn't make the list. So I would probably say three of them. There's a couple of, I think, Mudalawal too, really high on ability, but I would say those three if it was strictly ability. I think the sheer work that went into this one, I think I deserve a rest. But I don't think there's any call really to update this. I try to be as definitive as possible with this list. If I decided to update this list, it would probably be like in 10, 20 years or something. I don't think it's anything that needs to be revised in the short term. Like we said earlier, of the current crop is really just Victor Osimhen, who I think at this time has the potential to get into this list. I think it would have to be by the end of his career, we would look back and say, okay, this is what he did. And I think that's obviously like a decade in the future. For the next 5 to 10 years, this list is pretty solid.
Hi, Solace. See, I just need one answer to this question. How come Mudalawa is number 6 on this list? Is it because you are elderly? Is it because you watched him growing up? It's because I don't see how he's ahead of JJ Okocha and Sunday, but basically playing against First Bank employees and Unilever employees. I don't see what the point is. Football is not at the highest level. I'm not disrespecting him, but I don't think he's the top 10 Nigerian player. Football is not at the highest level. Don't let me disrespect Mudalawa. Just answer for your crimes, please.
I get this question a lot, and I think the people who ask this question don't really understand the parameters of the argument they're making. People tend to say, okay, the players did not play at, the level of football then was less than. If you think about it, every player is a product of the time they play football in, right? So if there was a standard of football that they were playing in then, this player did not come from the future. Whatever it was that made that level of football what it was, the player also came out of that circumstance. Football is clearly played at a much greater level at the moment than it was back in the 70s and 80s. It was also a very respectable level then. It wasn't cavemen whirling sticks around and kicking coconuts down the road or anything. So this list is a celebration of the 10 greatest Nigerian footballers of all time. Nigeria has had hundreds and hundreds of people play for the national team. This is the top 10. So these guys are the cream of the crop. There's no disrespect to anyone here.
It's Solace, what's up? What's good? I saw your list about the greatest players in Nigerian history. It's a great list though, like I can't lie. Like everybody that's there, they deserve to be there. But like, where's Victor Moses? Why is Victor Moses missing from this list? He won the league with Chelsea. He won the Serie A with Inter Milan. I mean, he won the AFCON in 2013. Why is he not here? I need answers, really. Boss, I need answers.
He's someone who I definitely would put in like a top 15 to 20. Obviously, like you say, he had a really good club career, but I think his national team career, even though he won, the Africa Cup of Nations in 2013, beyond that, I don't really think he did much for the Nigerian national team. I don't think his national team career was long enough. I think this is important because I'll give an example. Segun Odegbami finished 4th in the ranking, and if he had played one more year for Nigeria, he would have been number 1. Like, that's how close these rankings were in the end in terms of how the scores were computed. Just one more year would have gotten him into number 1. So I took into account longevity, which Victor Moses did not really have. I took into account leadership, like I mentioned earlier, which nobody can accuse Victor Moses of having been a particularly inspiring leader. I took into account, the social stuff, social impact.
Hi, Solace. So I went through your list and I'm wondering, why don't you have any player from the current Super Eagles in your team? You don't think any of them have done so much to merit the top 10 players of all time? Think about perhaps Victor Osimhen, Wilfred and Didi, players of that nature. You don't think any of them have done anything to come close to making the top 10 list of all time?
Just by the very nature of this list, it's obviously going to penalize players who are either still active or just retired. You need to be able to look at these players in terms of the totality of their club careers. So you can only do that when it's over. So you appraise everything as one big body of work.